Hello and welcome to the Teaching Transformations podcast, a collaboration between the Academy for Sustainable Futures and the Careers and Enterprise Service at Canterbury Christ Church University. I'm your host, Jack Swan. In this podcast, we interview lecturers and course leaders and ask them how they've managed to embed sustainability into their course and their teaching. Zulfi has a background in international development with over 2 decades of field experience in South Asia. His interests lie in post-colonial educational histories, as well as education for social and environmental justice. His teaching and research at CCCU relate to these 2 areas of interest. Currently, Zulfi is teaching on 3 modules in the undergraduate education suite across 5 courses. These modules include social justice and the pedagogy of freedom, where he's module lead, sustainability, education and action, and international education in a post-colonial world, as well as a small number of master's level modules. I began by asking Zulfi to explain a little bit about what he's teaching on these modules and how he goes about it.
Right, thank you for having me. So my approach is really a fairly broad-based one. I think we make a mistake in isolating sustainability and environmental issues and sort of disconnect those issues from the broader canvas of what's happening in the world. So if you look at what's happening in the world at the moment, we all know about the environmental crisis. We're staring down the abyss. There was a crisis for a long time that we've known about, but particularly since 2018, the crisis has been severe. So that's a given. We know that. But there's also a social justice crisis. We know from the works of people like Thomas Piketty and Danny Doling that inequalities are increasing massively across the world and in this country as well. I asked this question to my students because I come from South Asia. And I asked this question to my students. I say, we're the 5th, 6th largest economy in the world. We're the 5th, 6th richest country in the world. How do you explain the levels of poverty? How do you explain the levels of food banks that are operating at the moment and the destitution and the homelessness that's happening? So there's a massive social justice crisis. And then there's a political crisis. There's apathy on the one hand, and we're seeing wars and violence in all parts of the world. And a lot of the times, these wars and violence is connected to gas and oil and water. So it's important then to look at this holistically on a broader canvas, which then means the second point, which means that we have to look at it in a multidisciplinary way, which we quite often don't. We like to say we do, but quite often we don't. So the argument goes that, look, unless you understand political economy and history and geography and anthropology, you're not going to get this. So it's very important to remember, keep that in mind. And the third thing I think we miss out that my approach it's central to my approach is that I think sustainability education, any kind of environmental education, has to work on the basis of praxis, which is theory-informed action. So if action is missing, if activism is missing, then it becomes a purely theoretical exercise aimed at passing your module and getting the grade and moving to the next level, which I think defeats the purpose. So, I think environmental education could actually backfire if you do it really badly in a dry way. So these 3 are the pillars that, in my approach, that are central to the way I organize my teaching. One of the things I say to my students is that, look, learning in a university doesn't just happen in lecture theatres and seminar rooms. It happens in the university. It happens in lots of other places where you go and watch films and you meet and discuss ideas with people in the cafe. And you go to attend lectures which are not connected to your subject specialism. That's something that we must keep in mind. And they must have opportunities to practice what they're learning in the university environment. Okay, so going back to the point I was making earlier about looking at the broader picture, This module is not a standalone module. It's part of a series of 3 modules we've designed for the undergraduate education suite. So the first semester, first year, when students come in new, they do a module called Social Justice and the Pedagogy of Freedom, which looks at social justice and starts connecting it to environmental justice. This idea of the global north and the global south, and who's creating the problems and who's suffering most, who has the resilience to fight the problems we are facing at the moment, who doesn't. We've seen floods in the country that I come from, Pakistan, for example. Last year, 1/3 of that country was underwater in the floods. You're talking about a country of 230 million people, 1/3 of which was underwater. And those folk who are suffering are the poorest people in the country. They haven't got the resilience. They haven't got the means. So connecting social justice to environmental justice is key. So we do that in the first semester. In the second semester, we do a module called Sustainability, Education, and Action for Hope, where we take social justice, environmental justice, and we say, a lot of my students come back to me and say, oh, such a depressing module. And we say to them that, look, the news is depressing, but the end result doesn't need to be, because we connect it to this whole idea of action for hope. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about praxis, that if you are actually involved in finding solutions, if you're involved in pushing back to the big forces that are creating these problems, you automatically build hope because you're part of trying to find a solution. And you can't afford, as a global community, we can't afford despair and hopelessness. We've got to fight. So that's the second module. In the second year, first semester, we do a module called International Education in a Post-Colonial World. And again, we bring back these themes of what are the forces that shape the world we live in today, between the global north and the global south, and why does the world look the way it does now, and why is it that if in 2018 particularly we were given the most dire warning that we could get from the IPCC, why is it that things have only got worse? So we're hoping that these 3 modules together equip our students with the knowledge and the skills to try and understand these issues on a big scale, try and think about where they fit in, and then try and find collective solutions. One of the problems we have, I think, in the world we live in today is that we very quickly individualize problems and solutions. So the problem is happening out there, and the only thing I can do is to stop using a car or stop eating meat, which are all good things. But we need to understand that the answers are collective, and the problem is much bigger than individuals. And so to be able to understand the collective action that we can take is really central. And that's what the module sort of builds on. We start off by giving them a little bit of theory, not a huge amount, about, we're not scientists, so we don't need to know the very, detailed analysis of chemicals and what's happening. But we need to understand what is happening. So we start with that, and then we very quickly move on to, well, okay, who are we? Where do we position ourselves in this world? And what can we do? Okay, so one of the things, again, all these things go back to the 3 approaches I said, talked about at the beginning. So one of the things which is central is that sustainability education or environmental education is not about transferring lots of scientific knowledge to students about what's going wrong. I think it's critical that we engage them, which means the module or whatever we're doing has to be inspiring. The sustainability module is actually structured around 8 documentary films. And these are all sort of award-winning, globally famous documentary films. So every week we'll watch a film, and the topic of the film is the topic that we're going to discuss in our lectures and in our seminars. So they've got, in the lectures, they get information and ideas. In the seminar, they deconstruct it, they break it down, they discuss it, and they've got the film to give them inspiration and background to it. So that's one of the key things we do. The second thing we're trying to do increasingly is we're trying to find ways in which we can engage students in actually thinking about live scenarios. So the assessment, for example, is a portfolio. And in the portfolio, they can make films, they can do podcasts, they can write essays if they want, they can do presentations if they want. And we encourage them to look at real life issues and solutions, and create a project around it and do a portfolio on that.
What sort of things do they pick?
So a really popular one by far is fast fashion.
Okay.
Because I think all students relate to that. Everyone that comes to, all young people go to Primark and they buy from Shein, and they go to Gap and they go to Zara. And the moment they sit down, you sit down with them and start talking about not just the environmental impact, but the social justice impact of these companies and this mad cycle of fast fashion, which is constant. It's rolling out on a weekly, daily basis. It really hits them, and they relate to it. So a lot of people do projects on fast fashion. In fact, we're now, this week on Thursday, we're launching a campaign against fast fashion, which is led by students who last year did this module. So it really impacts them, it stays with them, and we're hoping that through this campaign we'll reach more people. So that's a very, very big one that they go for as an example. Okay, so the first thing to be very clear about is that this is work in progress. We haven't cracked it yet. Every year we make changes, and we hope that those changes, given the feedback of students and colleagues, that those changes will improve things. So this year, for example, we are next semester we're going to base the whole module on the Earth Charter. And students are going to produce some work, and the students in other departments, other faculties in this university who are producing work in their modules as well. And that's all going to go in an exhibition on the 22nd of April next year on Earth Day.
Can you tell us just very quickly what the Earth Charter is?
So the Earth Charter is a document that came out after the Rio Summit in 1992 in Brazil. And the idea was it's a people's movement. So their slogan is turning conscience into action. So it's a people's movement looking at the 16 principles, and what they're trying to do is to connect, like I said, social justice, environmental justice, peace, well-being, and human coexistence and diversity and indigenous knowledge. They're bringing all these themes together, and they'd want to create a movement whereby we start discussing these and then living these ideas and principles in our daily lives. It's a fantastic document. I think it gives a lot of room to academics to work with. And we're doing it this year, and we're hoping that we'll get some exciting output, and then we'll continue it next year. We'll fine-tune it again. In terms of challenges, again, you go back to the first point I was making. One of the first issues we have is that in universities, we're very good at compartmentalizing knowledge. So, in the real world, knowledge is connected. But in universities, you've got the politics department there and the economics department there. And, you think even when politics and economics first came up as subjects, people like Adam Smith and Karl Marx would call it political economy because they knew that these two were connected. But now we've disconnected them in universities. So the biggest challenge is that you go and talk to someone and they say, well, I study economics. What does this have to do with me? Or I study something else, and what's this got to do with me? Even within the education suite, that's a challenge for us because students come to us and say, well, I came here to do counseling, coaching, and mentoring. Why are you teaching me about social justice and environmental justice? And they say, well, I'm doing early childhood studies. Why are you teaching me this? And that's a challenge because that means that this idea of education, which quite often now is completely connected to employability. We don't think of education as a public good. We don't think of education as a thing in itself which enriches you and makes you understand the world. It's all about employability. And so people ask, well, is this going to get me a job or not? Actually, it is going to get them a job, but that's another story. So I think that's a big challenge. It's the mind frame. It's looking at education and saying, look, we've got to break these boundaries. And like I said, look at things in a more multidisciplinary way. Look at things and say, if you don't understand the big forces that shape the world, if you don't understand how we got to this place, I don't care what subject you study or what job you want to do, you're going to need this. You're going to need this understanding. So that's a big challenge. The second challenge, I think, again relates to what I was saying earlier about praxis, about action, is that, again, we've instrumentalized education. We've reduced it to, it's a transaction, it's a financial transaction. You come here, you pay some money, here are the modules, here are the rules of how the assignments work and how the lectures will work. And this is the assignment you're going to submit, and this is the mark you're going to get, and you tick the box and move on. So students quite often have no background or practice of engaging outside the lectures and seminars. A lot of them still think we were supposed to come in for 3 hours of seminar and lecture. We've done that, we're going home now. So to break that cycle and say, look, in universities, you're meant to have lectures happening everywhere, and film screenings happening, and discussion gatherings happening, and protests happening. That's part of your training of not just of ideas, but of activism. That's lacking now. I think the last 40 years of neoliberalism has done this to education. And we need to claw back. We need to win this battle of ideas, which says that, look, central to what we're doing is how you and I can work together and improve things. And that should be the central aim of education now, given how deep the crisis is that we are going through. It's mixed. I think, to be very honest with you, there are some students who are still not convinced. After having done these 3 modules, they still wonder why I was made to do these modules when I don't intend to work in this area. So, I can't claim to have that we have a really huge success rate. But for other students on the other end of the spectrum, it's transformative, because, there are lots of students that come to me in the 3rd year and say that, we see the world very differently now. And to me, that's the purpose of education. If you come into university in the 1st year and you leave in the 3rd year pretty much the same person you are, we failed. It's supposed to transform you. It's supposed to make you think in different ways and play with different ideas. So the response from students has been mixed. What's really encouraging is, and this is something we're trying to do now, is every year we try and add one more layer and see if we can push the boundary a bit more. So this year, we've got Amnesty International and Oxfam that we brought on to campus. A couple of years ago, some students who'd gone through these 3 modules had set up a society called Students for Activism Society. And they really struggled to recruit members and to convince people that, maybe some action should be taken. Because it's a cultural thing. If you don't have a culture of this happening on campus, then people are reluctant and not sure how to do this. This year we've got Amnesty and Oxfam. So far, it only came in this semester, so it's early days. But so far the response has been great. We're starting this week, we're starting a campaign which is going to be student-led through these societies on fast fashion. Like I said, that'll be a real test for us. How, and especially next semester, when the new first years are studying this topic, how will they relate to this campaign? How will they engage? That's a real test for us for next semester. And in exactly the same way, we've got a campaign we're launching on Friday on refugees and asylum seekers, which is, it's a slogan we picked up from the United Nations. It's a beautiful slogan. The campaign is called Hope Away from Home. So this idea that, this Kent Refugee Action Network, which works with refugee children, unaccompanied children. So most of them, all of them nearly, are under 18. And they're in a new country, in a new environment, all on their own. And surely we've got to have a compassionate and moral way of addressing these issues. So that's what the campaign's about. And for me, it links completely to sustainability and environment as well. So I think these are opportunities we're trying to inject now. And we're hoping that more students will take part in it. And if we can sustain this for the next few years, we'll see a big change. We'll see a massive change where what you're studying in your seminars and lectures is now directly connecting to what's happening outside, And that will change student perceptions a lot faster. And I think education will then hopefully become more meaningful for them. I think, like I said earlier, it's going to be a collective effort. And that's why we're trying to do these structural changes outside, like societies and campaigns and stuff, so that we can all, irrespective of what course we do, we can all plug into it. Because that's, for me, is the way forward. Because otherwise, like you said at the beginning of this discussion, we work in silos. And it's lonely, and it's not really powerful to do that. If we can find ways of working together. And I'm not suggesting that all of us agree on everything and do everything the same way, but if we can find avenues where we can work together, I think that'll be fantastic. And I think one thing I would say to students and my colleagues is there's this question we ask, and it ties into everything I've said so far. There's this question we ask about relevance. How is sustainability relevant to the course I do? Well, I think it's a wrong question. I think it's a misplaced question. And again, it's because what we were saying all this time, that knowledge is not compartmentalized. It's all connected. We've got to stop asking this question, because we are in such a situation at the moment, and we know so much about what is going wrong and what can go wrong. We just look at what's happened in the last couple of years. I think we should be now at a stage where we shouldn't be asking this question. It should be a given that this is an existential crisis. And education is not a ritual that, and it's not a financial transaction where you're paying some money and getting a degree at the end of it. And it's not about getting a first and a 2-1. It's about us as human beings. How do we understand the world? How do we understand our place in that world? And how do we change that world? Now, that's controversial, because that comes from the background that I come from, which is critical pedagogy. A lot of my colleagues will say to you that that's not the job of education, to change the world. Our job is just to teach students. I disagree. I think we need to change our mind frame, because we don't have time. We don't have an option of being hopeless. We don't have an option for despair. We must now, education must reorient itself completely and radically to face the challenges we're going to face in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you for that clarion call there, Zulfi. That's really good. And thank you for making the time today and telling us about all your amazing work. Best of luck with everything, particularly with the new launches you've got coming up this week. Really exciting stuff. And take care.
Thank you for having me.
Speak to you soon. Thanks again to Zulfi Ali for sharing his thoughts on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us on the Teaching Transformations podcast. The podcast is a collaboration between the Academy for Sustainable Futures and the Careers and Enterprise Service at Canterbury Christ Church University. I've been your host, Jack Swan. Production and video editing is handled by Harry Cooper. The video version of the podcast was recorded by Harry King and Drew Shelley Winfield. Audio design and editing is managed by Matt Crawley. Additional equipment and recording space was organised by James Sanford and Kiara Hewer. Distribution and promotion is organised by Bethany Clemson. Special thanks go to Andrew Lombard and Felicity Brambling-Wells for all their support in helping us put together this Teaching Transformations podcast.